Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we're talking about using an Agile framework to win more grants and get more done. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tammy Tilsey and I'm the Director of Foundant's Grant Seeker Products, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. We're so honored to have Diane Leonard with us today. I'm looking forward to learning more about how to use the Agile framework in my own work and seeing how it applies as well to everyone else, and getting your comments is back as you see how it works is something we're excited for today. So first, though, a few housekeeping items. We're using GoToWebinar as our technology for sharing today's session, and there are a few things to note. We're not going to use the raise your hand feature. We have way too many people on to make that feasible, but we are going to be using the question box. So if you have questions as we're going through, definitely type them in. We're going to keep an eye on that, and if there's a question or people are confused about something, we will answer those as we go, and plus we have a time at the end to answer those questions. There's also, if you view your handouts, I've uploaded a slide deck, a PDF of today's slides, so don't worry about trying to write everything down. We'll also send the recording and the slides out to everyone, whether you're attending or not, so you'll get those. So don't worry about those items. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the content. Today's webinar is 60 minutes, and you could use this orange arrow to move the controls aside if you want to see the full screen. So today's agenda. If this is the first Foundant-sponsored educational webinar that you've attended, thank you for joining us. We do these educational webinars typically once a month. The agenda is simple. We tell you who Foundant is very briefly and why we do these webinars, and we turn the time over to our guest speaker. We learn, and then we leave time for questions. So with that, let's dive in and talk briefly, like I mentioned, about Foundant Technologies. Foundant is a technology company that focuses on building solutions that maximize the impact of the philanthropic community. We do that through grant management solutions, both for funders, for community foundations, for scholarship providers. We also provide solutions for grant seekers, and this is the division that is sponsoring this webinar, making it free for you. So a little bit more about that solution. Grant Hub helps grant seekers and grant professionals plan their workload, what grants they have coming up, streamline submission, and the whole writing of grants and reporting on status and finding new grants. All these types of things was what Grant Hub helps you do. It's a online application, very affordable, and if you're ever in the market to upgrade or look at whether a grant management solution is a fit for you, we hope you check us out at that time. Also, our webinars are approved. Foundant Technology is a GPCI, that stands for Grant Professional Certification Institute. So we're an accepted continuing education provider. So this session here has been approved for 1 credit towards your GPC credential. You may want to learn more. I'm providing that link in the slides, and you can go to the website to learn more about the GPC program. Now, down to the fun part. Let's meet our guest speaker, Diane Leonard. She is a GPC, so she also is an approved trainer for GPA. She owns DH Leonard Consulting and grant writing services and has a wealth of experience from that, as well as beginning her career as a program officer. Particular to today's session, she is a certified Scrum Master and certified product owner. I'll let her speak a little bit more about what that means in her background as well. She's raised over $53 million awarded for her clients, and I know she just loves to run and has a treadmill desk and loves coffee as well. So without any more ado, I'm going to change the presenter over to Diane and let her run it from here. And again, like I said, if you have questions, type them in, and we'll let Diane share her screen.
I apologize. I think we had a little tech glitch on my part. Sorry for that. Give me a second, Tammy.
No problem. I could see you're very quickly navigating.
I know I must have accidentally closed something there. I drank too much coffee before the session. That's what'll always get me in trouble, right? There we go. How's it look
Yes,
now?
perfect.
All right, good. Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you to Grant Hub and Foundant Technologies for partnering on today's webinar. It is Digital Learning Day, which I think is just the most serendipitous thing about our annual webinar that we offer together. And so I see that already folks are finding the questions box, and some of our dear friends on there are questioning if it really is possible for me to have too much coffee. Thanks, Clay. So we're here, though, today to talk about something that is, I guess I'd say, a bit of a niche topic in the grant field. I want to talk about using an Agile framework to win more grants. Many of you know me, and you know that I love grants. But you know what? I have grown to love Scrum just as much. And so I wanted to share that information with you as my colleagues in the field. So when Tammy and the Foundant team and I talked about today's session, we set out a goal that we wanted to, as much as we could at a high level in this 1 hour, focus on increasing your understanding of Scrum as a uniform approach for you to think about in your grant writing work, how you assign work within your teams, and how you iterate your grant writing work. Here's what we've got for our agenda today. What is Scrum? How is it that we can use Scrum to create our grant calendar? How can we use Scrum when we're thinking about managing grant applications? And how can we use Scrum to facilitate a grant team? I've got a few resources at the end. We'll end with questions as well, as Tammy mentioned. I do also have the questions box up on my second screen, and so I'll do my best to help monitor those if you have a question while we're on a particular slide. So what is Scrum? I think actually we're best to start by saying what Scrum is not. So Scrum is not an acronym. Scrum is not a software. And perhaps for our sports fans out there, when I'm talking about Scrum, we're not talking about the starting formation for rugby. How's that for some definitions or the anti-definition? Instead, let's say, what is Scrum? So Scrum is a uniform approach to doing work, assigning work in teams, and iterating work successfully during a long period of time. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like our work as grant professionals? Indeed, it does. And I'm going to share with you how we do this, whether we are a grant professional that's the sole employee focused on grant writing, or whether we're in a team of grant writers, or whether we're a consultant. It can apply in any of those settings. Now, for those of you that have perhaps heard of Agile, that's a larger term used if we think about our agility in business. Scrum is a specific framework within Agile. Now, I'd like to ask a quick question of you. So I'm going to open up a poll real quick. I'm curious to know if any of you have ever heard of Agile or Scrum before signing up for today's webinar. So if you could take just a quick moment and click on the radio button on your screen, letting me know if you had ever heard of Agile or Scrum before signing up for today's webinar. No right or wrong answer. That's the fun part about this one. All right, looks like about 30% of you had heard the phrase Agile or Scrum before. That's pretty exciting. All right. And then one more question to help me understand a little bit about you as our audience. Why is it that you took time out of your day to attend this session? Why were you excited to sign up? We all love free webinars, but we have to prioritize our time, right? So you decided to take time to join us today. What is it about today's topic that excited you and made you sign up? Wonderful. All right. Lots of variation in answers, almost split actually across the 4 that I've given as some ideas. Wonderful. And of course, I could have had all of the above. I get it. But wonderful. Thanks for answering those questions for me. All right. So if we think about What is Scrum, right? It's that Agile framework. Maybe for those of you that said, I didn't know what Agile was before I got here, let's quickly define what is Agile. So if you're really interested and you want to read more, perhaps you want to grab a cup of coffee or maybe seltzer, tea, beverage of your choice, you can read the Agile Manifesto at agilemanifesto.org. Public sourced, and that's where all the different Agile frameworks, they all tie back to this manifesto. At a high level, what does the manifesto say? That those that are Agile, whether using the Scrum framework or something similar, that those organizations, those teams focus and value on individuals and interactions. That's the positive versus what does the process say we have to do? What does the tool say we must do? If we're thinking about working product, iterating our solutions for our customers, whether our customers are grant makers or those buying a product, versus having a stack of documentation and requirements. We're thinking about how we collaborate with our customers and learn about their requirements, their feedback, versus, again, that paperwork. And responding to change versus saying, well, this is the plan, we must follow it. If there is any value here that resonates with me as life as a grant pro, it's that one. We are constantly responding to change as we get new opportunities that perhaps we hadn't planned on our grant calendar. And what do we do as grant pros? We adapt and we react, right? So whether you knew it or not, in your daily life as a grant professional, you already are expressing Agile techniques. So as we think about Scrum, there's another way, not just in the way you react to your own personal grant calendar, but there's another formal framework that you may have already utilized. With a quick wire and in the questions box, are any of you already familiar with compression planning? Compression planning has been a specific workshop within the Grant Professionals Association national conferences. It's been a multi-day pre-conference session, and it's an institute that you can go to on your own, separate from anything related to the Grant Professionals Association. I know I saw a few names in our attendee list who've actually gone to some of those compression planning sessions. So compression planning is a way that organizations can plan, work with multiple stakeholders, multiple collaborative partners to look at strategic visioning, to focus on large programs, even to think about big federal applications. You can find out more information about compression planning on the website on this slide. And as a reminder, the slides are available in your handouts for today's session. But what you might not have known if you've heard of compression planning before is that it's an Agile tool. It is a great framework that fits right in with what we're talking about today. As you're thinking about Scrum and what it is, this is the line that hooks most people. In fact, this is what made me say when I first heard about Scrum, oh, I'll buy that book. The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. Yes, please. We are grant professionals that always have an incredibly long list of proposals we want to get done in a year to meet our revenue goals and to help our organization meet their strategic goals, right? So what if we could write more grants in the same period of time without ever sacrificing our best practices as grant professionals? I can see you're nodding. You're like, yes, please. So a quick theoretical piece about Scrum. This was one of the theories that really stuck with me and said, you know what, indeed, I need to figure this out. When we think about our work as grant professionals and we look at the theory of constraints, the idea that if you have multiple processes, sometimes something will slow you down. You'll have a bit of a bottleneck. If you think about a bottleneck within your own organization, whether you're a consultant or an employee, is there something that is slowing your work as a grant professional down? You don't have to tell me who or what process it might be, but what is that constraint for you? I will be honest, in my own organization, I felt like I was the constraint. The process of review and the way in which we were planning out our work, I felt like I was the one slowing the team down. They were waiting on me. Perhaps, though, what you have found to be a constraint is that you're waiting for feedback trying to get information so that you can finish out your draft. There's a wide range of answers that you could be feeling are the constraint. But so this, along with the idea of doing twice the work in half the time, is what made me want to dig in deeper. And so, as Tammy said, I'm a certified Scrum Master and a certified Scrum Product Owner. What that means, I've gone to a bunch of classes and taken some pretty long tests related to Scrum at this point. And I have to now maintain that certification. I drank the Scrum Kool-Aid the same way I fell in love with grants. If we think about the main framework of Scrum, it's the 3-5-3. When we look at organizations and teams that are doing Scrum, it means that in their team setting, there are 3 roles. There is a Scrum Master, there's always the team itself, and there's a product owner. It doesn't mean a company owner. It means the person responsible for setting the goal that the team is working towards. The Scrum Master is focused on removing impediments, helping the team to move as quickly as possible. In a team that is using Scrum, they consistently in each of the cycles are following and having 5 events. They are planning for the upcoming sprint. There is the sprint itself, so the defined period of time in which work is being looked at. Sprints can be anything from 1 to 4 weeks. My team uses 2-week sprints. In large federal and state grant applications, we use 1-week sprints when we communicate with clients. We then have the daily stand-up, a quick check-in with team members to see, what did you do towards the sprint goal? What are you doing tomorrow towards the sprint goal? What sort of impediments might you be facing that we could, as a team, cross-functionally help address? And then we have the sprint review. How did we do in that sprint period? Is there something we could do better? Something that went really well? Anything we want to change? And the retrospective is saying, is our team happy? How was our velocity? Is there one change we could make to increase team velocity or team happiness? And we're left with these 3 artifacts. So sprints are very visual in many offices. The process of Scrum, very visible, talking about making work visible. We have the product backlog. We're going to look at this in a few minutes in greater detail. So what are the things coming up? In our grant world, they're what are the upcoming applications? Our sprint backlog are the smaller stories. What are the specific things we need to do? The attachments, the budgets, the narrative drafts. And our product increment are the things that are done. So the submitted application is the biggest product increment in our work as grant professionals. If we think about Scrum and why it is that there are these defined periods of time, these 1 to 4 week sprints, it's because of the idea that we are constantly iterating and improving our work. Sounds a lot like narrative drafting, doesn't it? You'll see Scrum as it predominantly came out from the software world where they're thinking about releases of software to customers. You'll see it in hardware. We're looking at Tesla, SpaceX. Those are companies run by Scrum. You're looking at nonprofits that are being trained in Scrum, consulting groups like ours using Scrum to work with the nonprofits. The point of it is that it's across all different organization types, completely applicable because all of us have things that we're iterating and making better. We're going to look at estimating just a little bit later on because this, to me, this was a huge game changer. So the Fibonacci sequence, the naturally occurring order of numbers. There's a fantastic video on YouTube that shows Fibonacci as it relates to pine cones and the sunflowers and shells. It's a lot of fun, so if you want to later get coffee, head out to YouTube and look for some Fibonacci videos. But these numbers, it means that 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, 5 plus 8 equals 13, and so on. We use these estimates when we're looking at our work following the Scrum framework, because as a rule, we as humans are terrible at estimating. And when we think about project management as a whole, waterfall project management is not a strong way to predict, are we going to be done on time? Projects are coming in late. Now, in our work as grant professionals, we force the issue. We know that grant applications can't be accepted late. It's a little bit different than some of the for-profit sales of software or hardware. Maybe investors say you get it by this date or you're out. But in the grant world, indeed, get the application in or you're rejected. They're not going to consider you. So what does that mean? How do we make sure we come in on time? We might drink too much coffee and stay up too late. Well, we estimate our stories using 4 different factors: complexity, effort, externality, and uncertainty, to try and understand what does our grant calendar look like? What is our capacity? Do we have room for more? Are we going to be able to get it all done by the deadline with the resources we have without any heroic efforts? That's what we'll call our extra caffeine consumption and extra hours. We've all done it and we get the job done, but that's what, if we're not careful, of course, would cause burnout in our work. So rather, we use these estimates as a way to think about our grant calendar and our capacity to get the work done. Now, I will say, as awesome as Scrum is, there is no way that Scrum would ever be able to help us as grant professionals eliminate those last-minute requests that might come in from grant makers. We just don't have that sort of magic power, right? So what Scrum does for us, though, is because we have a plan, because we have our sprints planned out aligned with our grant calendar, when something last minute comes up, we can look at our priorities, we can look at the stories that are happening now or are planned for the future, and say, what do we shift to react? Do we need extra resources? Do we need an extra team member from development to hop in? Do we need to push back a rolling deadline till next month in order to create the space for this project to happen? What do we need to have happening? So let's look at Scrum and walk through grant calendars. So grant calendars, I'm guessing that the majority of you have one for your organization. Maybe it is on Google Calendar, maybe you're using GrantHub, and so you've got your whole plan laid out in that tool. Maybe it's the whiteboard in your development office. When we think about creating our grant calendar, I've laid out 5 steps. How can we use the idea, the framework of Scrum to create our grant calendar? Yes, we're going to start with our list of funders and what we know about our deadlines. We've got our list of current funders and our research funders right in front of us. So how do we use it to create our calendar? Our first step, and this is most fun, trust me, if you do this with sticky notes on a big wall in your office or your conference room so that you can move things around. That's making work visible. It's easy then to adapt and make changes. So you're going to lay out the months for your fiscal year, and you're going to take your absolutes. So those that are your renewals or those that are new funders that you know you're going to apply for that have specific deadlines. And you're going to lay those out on the month that they're due. Now, if we were getting into the weeds and if we had more than an hour, we'd be talking about large-scale estimation. So how we can quickly judge the size of big things. But as a rule, you understand that a foundation grant is much smaller on the scale than a state grant, and that most federal grants would be much larger than many state grants, right? So you can sort of understand the scale, but we'd give real numbers to those with large-scale estimation. Once we've laid out our absolutes, our next step is to take those things that we have to do to maintain our funding and lay them out across those same 12 months. So the best example of that is, let's take our reports. Where are our reports due in the year? Both programmatic and financial. We're starting to get a sense of what our year looks like. Our third step is that we're going to take those opportunities that we're interested in applying for, but we've got the flexibility to think about those rolling deadlines. Where would we like to place them on the calendar? You might say that it's because you can see that, geez, that list in June looks a little bit short compared to the other months, so I'm going to try and plan for rolling deadlines in that month. For sake of today's example, we're assuming that all of our post-its, all of our deadlines have been estimated to be exactly the same. Now, that isn't what would actually happen if we were looking at your grant calendar, but for sake of simplicity today, we're saying that each of the stories are exactly the same. So we've placed our firm deadlines, we've placed our reports, we've placed our rolling deadlines onto the grant calendar. We look at the year, we decide that it looks pretty stable, pretty consistent across the year in terms of the effort that we would be looking at. And so these stories is a Scrum term. In grant world, let's call them grant related tasks. Okay, so a whole application, a grant writer, a grant maker's report. These are big picture items that you have on your grant calendar, but we call them stories in Scrum. So we've got our grant calendar laid out. We feel pretty good. We think we can raise the revenue that we're supposed to with that calendar. And so you start your year. Well, then real life might happen. But before we can start our grant calendar, before we can get underway, we should stop and make sure that our colleagues agree it's a good idea too, right? We don't want the weight of that decision on just us as the grant professional. So you're going to try and get your team, your other development stakeholders, your leadership stakeholders, however you define your grant team, you want to have them agree that this is a good plan. Part of what you're doing is saying this is what we're committing to. Everybody agrees with these priorities. If you were starting a grant strategy for the first time, you wouldn't have much to judge your capacity on, right? To say, is this feasible or not? But if you've done this before, you personally or your organization, you've got last year's track record of what you were able to submit to judge your calendar based on. This is for thinking about velocity that we're going to measure later on. This is us also saying, what was last year's velocity? What did we accomplish? How much did we get done? Can we get that same amount or maybe more done as a team coming up? So as we're implementing, we're in the middle of our fiscal year and we're implementing our grant calendar. And this is where, as I said, real life happens. An opportunity opens and you weren't expecting it. Despite your best planning, something has opened that is what feels like a perfect fit, and your organization decides that we really should apply. This is an important opportunity. And so you as the grant professional look at your big picture plan. This is really your product backlog. And you say, well, all right, that's due in July, but I didn't have any extra capacity to spare. Look, it was full. What would we do as an organization in order to make room for that story? What could we do? Well, the simplest thing is that we could take that rolling deadline in July and push it off by a month so that we can make room for the opportunity that we didn't expect to fit into our capacity. Or maybe instead your organization says, you know what we can do? We're going to give you some extra support from the development office while you're working on this, and so we'll lend you some extra hands. The major gift officer is going to help you with drafting for one of those deadlines, right? So we can have some flexibility. Or maybe you say, you know what, I need to phone a friend. I've got to ask our collaborative partner if they could lend some extra support for the application they're involved in. Could their grant professional help us write it, right? You get creative with your solution. So as we're rolling through our grant calendar, maybe it happens again. Something else opens that you weren't expecting. Every time this happens, you as a team, as an organization, need to be saying, what is our capacity? What priorities would we shift to make room for this extra work to get done? Is it extra people resources are given to the team? Do we shift what we're applying for and when? Do we call in external support in some form? The answer differs based on the team, based on the organization. But if we don't have those conversations, if we don't adjust, if we don't pivot, what's going to happen? Too much coffee, too many late hours, burn out. Although perhaps maybe if you're looking for a little bit of overtime, if you're in a setting where you could get paid overtime, that's cool. But we really want to think about it as a team for how we can be engaged. Now, I see that we've got a few questions that have come in as we've been talking about this. So we got a question about how far in advance of planning your grant calendar do you meet with your team to decide what grants you're going to apply for? This looks really different in different organizations depending on their culture of grant teams and their history with grant calendars. But your grant calendar should be tied to your fiscal year. So as you're doing your organization's budgeting for the fiscal year, that's usually the right time that an organization is also looking at a grant calendar. Now, we're revisiting the grant calendar, though, on an ongoing basis. It's a living, breathing document, as you can see from these steps. And so if we're thinking about sprints, Catherine's asks how often you should have sprint planning sessions. So a sprint is either a 1, 2, 3, or 4-week period of time. And that's up to your organization for what is best. So your sprint planning sessions are happening with that same frequency as the sprint itself. Let's switch gears and talk about using Scrum to manage grant applications. And before we do that, I want to say this is all so super high level, right? I'm giving you just the scratch of the surface to say, what would this look like if you took Scrum and tried to use it in your organization? There clearly is a great deal more of detail that would go into helping you feel comfortable and understanding the framework. But what I really wanted to do today was help you understand how the framework plays out in our world as grant professionals. So if we're thinking about using Scrum when we manage grant applications, has anyone ever been asked the question, so how long is that application going to take you? Well, maybe you have a canned answer if it's a foundation grant. Maybe you have a different canned answer if it's a state grant, and a different canned answer altogether if it's federal. But each application, as you know, looks so different. And so can we really give just an hour estimate? Is that the way that we want to think about planning? Is it simply about our hours as the grant professional? If it was that simple, success for grant application development and management would look like the arrow on the left-hand side, a completely straight line. But in fact, even when we're successful, when we get the money, if we look backwards, right, there is all sorts of give and take, left turns, right turns, squiggly turns that it took to get the information, get it into draft, get it approved, and get it submitted. If we think about our applications, let's pick on a state grant for a minute. And so we're going to pick on the consolidated funding application process that happens in New York. We went through this process with the Upstate New York chapter of the Grant Professionals Association because, well, they live the CFA process every year. So we used it as an example. If you look at it as just, air quotes, a state grant in an online portal, you might say, oh, that's not too bad. Character counted applications, narratives, little budget. But the reality is it's got a monstrous attachment list. Every time someone submits something through CFA, there's huge lists of attachments. So we were doing some visual planning and trying to think about how would we meet this deadline. It's open for a period of usually 60 to 90 days. How would an organization decide to apply, get all the work done, and submitted during, what turns out to be some pretty nice months in New York when it's not snowing? So what they did is we gave different Post-it colors to different elements of the application. The narrative, the 3 different versions were blue. The budget-related work, the budget itself and the justifications, were the peach color. And each of the attachments was yellow. That shows you that there are a lot of moving pieces from what otherwise on your grant calendar would be just one Post-it. And now you can start to plan your work. As the grant professional, is anyone feeling overwhelmed looking at this particular image on the screen? I know I am. I've done these historic preservation grants. That is a long list of meaty attachments. And so if you were to think about tackling this application and you just had your one Post-it in July, it would absolutely sink your month. it might not be possible to get it all done. So as you're planning with your team, as you're looking ahead at what's coming up, by breaking out a future story into these smaller stories, you're able to look at your estimations to think about what is the effort that it takes for this work? What is the complexity of what we're looking at? What is the externality? What do we need to get from collaborative partners or from our architects? Right? We've got a lot of things that we as the grant professional don't control. So we want to think about estimating. You can see that there's teeny tiny little numbers written in the bottom right-hand corner of each of those Post-its. What we did was estimate the relative size of the different elements to get a sense of what is the total size of the story. So if we look at Fibonacci again, if we come back to that idea of 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, and so on, the members of your team are helping you estimate the size of the individual components based on these 4 factors, based on complexity, effort, externality, and uncertainty. What we're trying to do is see, does the team's capacity, does the team's velocity have the ability to get this work done? Or do we need to make some shifts? Can we get it all done? And you might say, oh, great, team, why are we talking about the team? When we talk about a Scrum team as it relates to a grant writing team, you should be thinking about your cross-functional team. It does not mean it has to be a team of the grant professionals. Rather, it's the team that you're likely already working with to get information from for your applications. So maybe someone for evaluation, someone from program leadership, someone from finance or HR, those that are engaged in providing the information, in approving, in reviewing your grant applications. That is your cross-functional team. You may still be the one that ultimately you are the lead writer. That's your job. And so you're probably helping to facilitate this process. In fact, you may be considered the product owner. I'd like to help you understand the estimating in grants a little bit more directly. So we've got a reference story here. As we estimate in any team setting, we need to agree on what is our reference story and what is its value. In my team, one of our reference stories actually relates to writing a blog post. And in our estimating scenario, that reference story is a 2. When you go to Scrum Master training, if you decide to ever take that step, and they're doing estimating, the way that they teach estimating is by having the teams in the class estimate Lego kits. Super fun, especially if you're a parent of children that have Legos, but indeed, they're using Legos as a way to help you think about non-job specific estimation. Well, today I wanted to dig right in about estimation in the grant world. So we're going to say that your reference story is a 1-page letter of inquiry and that your reference story is 5 points. Okay, so head to the questions box. How many points would you think is one large state application with all attachments? If I have told you that a 1-page letter of inquiry is 5 points, all right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and then it goes to 34, 55, 89, 144. You could pick a whole bunch of different numbers out of that sequence. And my favorite one when I ask this is the folks that say, can I use all my cards? Can I use all my points? Right? You don't have enough information about a state application based on what I've told you in order to estimate, because you don't know what the attachments look like. You don't know how long the narrative is. You don't know enough. You need more details to estimate in order to use a reference story of a letter of inquiry to find a relative size. You'd need all your cards. So let's look at something smaller. So a letter of inquiry, I've given you as a 5. It's just 1 page, and just in air quotes, 5 points. So if our Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, What would be your answer for how many points is a 2,000 character response? Just a single 2,000 character response. Do you think that that is easier or harder using our 4 factors: complexity, effort, externality, and uncertainty? What would you estimate that is with your reference story, your letter of inquiry being 5? Go ahead and type it in. Let's see what we get. All right. We're getting everything from 2s to, we got everything from 1 to 8. Great. We're close. We're not within 3 Fibonacci numbers, but we're close. So we would be able to, as a team, we'd go through the formal estimating process, but we would agree then on what that is. And from what I'm seeing, I'm going to say it's probably going to be a 5 is what it looks like the average would be. We would average across the team. And so now everyone's voice has been heard, and we have another estimate that we would be using in our grant calendar. What if I told you that we had to do 20 2,000 character responses for the application? What would you say your estimate is? Could we say, well, we agreed as a team that our average was a 5-point estimate for one 2,000 character response? We could simply extrapolate, right? We could say that we're going to multiply by the 20. Or we could decide as a team, as we're estimating, that actually there's a lot of overlap between them, so it's not a simple mathematical equation. Instead, maybe it's something less. Maybe it's an 89 or a 55 as we look at our scale. But we as a team are estimating together to judge based on those 4 factors. If as a team we continue through our estimating, we're looking ahead at our grant calendar, thinking about what's coming up. If I asked you how many points it would be for all 16 required uploads for a grant application, you should answer that that is too big of a story. Each of your uploads by itself would be its own story. Because something like a required attachment, that's a 501c3 letter, that's probably a 1, isn't it? But what if it's developing, completing, and uploading a brand new logic model? Definitely not a 1, right? So we need to understand more of the details of each of those 16 uploads in order to judge what it would be as a story value. We could, if I said to you, I need you to, as a definition of done, have a PDF packet of the commitment and support letters that are going to go into the application. What might you estimate that to be? What do you think that could be? A 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, right? We're getting a number of different answers here again. And so we would go through the formal estimating process, and if we're within 3 Fibonacci numbers within our responses, we would average for our total. As we think about our estimating, if we come back to our big picture here for the state application, you as a team would walk through all these different post-its for your relative sizing. Now, we could say that Lauren's organization has used one reference story and come up with their estimates. But for the same application, Brianna has done the same thing and totally different. Does it matter? No. As long as a team is consistent in their estimating process, it's not about having the same numbers across teams. It's about your own relative scale. What this helps you do is look at, again, your capacity as a team. Can we get the work done? And ultimately, looking at our deadline, are we on track to finish the grant on time? When we look at an application, let's say one that's due in 90 days, and we've got lots of moving pieces. If we went through the estimating process, for sake of this example, we're going to say that the team agreed that the large federal application is going to be 1,500 points. Cool, okay, I'm not going to argue with that, right? A team went through the estimating and it's 1,500 points. The flat bars, those are the weekends. We don't want our grant professionals or our teams working on the weekends. But so if you look at the burn down here, the graph, what it's doing is measuring progress towards the deadline, towards the end of a sprint or the end of a release, so the completion of an application. And every time a story is completed, that the definition of done has been met, the line drops. Now, if I were to look at this, knowing nothing about a team, about their application, about their organization, as the line stays above the gray line, when the red line stays above the gray line, it means that you are in danger of finishing late. When you are below the gray line, you're in wonderful position and may actually submit ahead of the deadline. Pretty cool way to be able to say to your colleagues, we've got to get a move on together. Let's really swarm on this application. We're in danger of missing our deadline, right? Or, hey, kudos, guys. Or maybe you don't tell them because you don't want them to know how far ahead you are. But, hey, we're really looking good for submitting early. This is an incredibly powerful tool when looking at one specific application and also when looking at multiple applications being worked on simultaneously. You can have a graph for each application looking at your overall progress towards submission. I want to talk about each of these sections for literally hours because there's so much fun stuff behind it. But we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about facilitating the grant team. But let me tell you, burn downs, so incredibly fun. You can have them on online tools. You can do them physically in your office using whiteboards. Really a powerful tool for predicting your success and your submissions. So let's think about facilitating that grant team. Show of hands, while you're in the questions box, how many of you would say that you have engaged grant teams? Do you have engaged grant teams? Oh, my heart is smiling for those of you that say yes, or at least a few. I like that answer. I even got a yes with smiley faces. Yay, Felicity, woohoo! Okay, for those of you that said no, or you are the team, let's help expand your definition. Maybe you already agree with the definition, but it's about expanding it for your colleagues. So grant teams, whether your colleagues want to ever call it that or not, right? I don't care what it's called. It could be called a Scrum team. It's the grant team. It's the cross-functional team. It's the get grant funding team. What it is the cross-functional group of colleagues in your organization that have a stake in your grant applications being successful. Are they willingly sitting around and talking about grants once a week? Maybe not. What about once a month? Maybe more willing on that level. They are at least, at a minimum, the colleagues in your organization who are happy, sometimes plied with Girl Scout cookies or coffee, to supply information for your grant applications. So here's some of the different departments that you might think about calling your grant team or looking at for a Scrum team. Here are some of the key activities in some of the larger applications. When we talk about folks trying to go after federal grants for the first time, you're probably nodding. To not absolutely overstress or spend too many hours, a successful federal grant application is best when you've got multiple engaged folks in your organization, right? So we use this as a chart to try and help individuals that are grant professionals struggling to build a grant team. We use this to help them say, hey, I'm going to need your help for this part of the application, right? So whatever the process is to identify and engage your grant team, take the steps, take the effort. If you need a cheerleader, if you need somebody to help cajole the team, give me a shout. You'll have my email when we're done. Happy to help be your cheerleader for building a grant team. And quite honestly, Girl Scout cookies work magic. I don't just say that because I'm a Girl Scout leader in my spare time, but trust me, client grant teams get super excited when application season rolls around and they get a box full of Thin Mints and Samoas. No joke. So if we're thinking about the grant team, once you've crossed the hurdle, for those of you that were the no's or the maybes on the grant team, once you've got those engaged folks, and let's say that you're in the middle of a big application and they're engaged, you want to have a daily stand-up with them. The stand-up is fantastic when you are physically together and you can actually stand up, because the stand-up is time-boxed at 15 minutes or less. But perhaps your team is remote. My entire writing team is remote. Our clients are remote. So how in the world do we do stand-ups? We get creative. We have a Google Doc that we use as our stand-up document with our entire team. We also have ongoing stand-up phone calls with subsets of teams doing different work. Regardless of the format that the stand-up takes, there are 3 questions that are being answered, whether in Google Doc, email, on the phone, or in person. What did I do today that helped the team meet the sprint goal? So what did I do towards getting version 1 of the narrative done? Or what did I do today that helped the team get the budget justification draft finalized? Then you answer the question, what will I do tomorrow or the rest of this sprint to help us meet the goal? And gosh, is there anyone else I can help with any of their stories or their impediments? And lastly, do I see any impediments, any bottlenecks, any issues that are preventing me or the team from meeting the goal? So maybe like, I need this extra document that I've requested 4 times, or I need that information that I put a comment in the Google Doc, or I really need that new job description. Whatever it is, can we remove that impediment so we can move forward? It's about a dialogue with your team. Your team being cross-functional, if you think about them as T-shaped, right? Everybody put their arms out, and if you were to reach out in a stand-up, the idea is that you could reach out, and while you have different skill sets, you could help other members of the team if you're trying to accomplish that goal together. When we think about our grant team, there's a few things that we're measuring each sprint. Believe it or not, one of the most important measurements that Scrum teams are looking at each and every sprint is team happiness. Team happiness is being measured as it relates to 3 elements. What is the individual team member's happiness with their role, with the team as a whole, and with the company or the organization? Whether you're a nonprofit, a consulting firm, a for-profit company, these are the exact questions being asked of Scrum teams as they're doing their retrospective each and every sprint. Measuring team happiness, you might say, well, are they going to be honest? They're going to lie, right? No, you'd be shocked. And it is a really telling indicator of what you can do to engage your team in grants so that when they talk about grant applications, they don't make the face. The one that tells you that they view grants as stressful and something they might not want to participate in. You also are measuring team velocity. So this is the total of the number of points that were completed in a sprint. This is what helps you plan in the future. So again, each team's estimating looks different. For sake of argument, let's say that a team started in their first sprint and they accomplished 100 points. That's awesome. And then in the next sprint, they accomplish 110, and then 120, and then 130. Their velocity is climbing. What that shows is that the next time they're doing planning, they're thinking about their grant calendar, they can plan for more points as they do their estimating. They're getting a sense of how much they can bring in as a team. And in the long run, as their team velocity increases, they will end up doing more applications in the same period of time when compared to what happened last year. I'm like, oh my gosh, time's almost up. I want to talk about Scrum and grants. As long as you'd have me, as long as Foundant would let me keep chatting about it. But I want to share some resources, some ways that you can learn about Scrum on your own if you're excited about what you've learned today. You can go read Scrum by either buying the hard copy, the Kindle version, or downloading it on Audible. So The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, written by Dr. Jeff Sutherland and his son, J.J. Sutherland. They're the co-creators of Scrum. I'm not an affiliate, so I get nothing for saying any of this. Scrum Inc. is one of the certifying bodies that offers a lot of training, and the Scrum Alliance is another great resource. Now, the work that my team and I do A project of DH Leonard Consulting is something now called Agile in Nonprofits. It's me talking about and sharing resources and information about using Agile ideas, the Scrum framework, in our work as nonprofits. I've used it in an organization where I serve as a board member. We're using it with our clients. We're using it for running my actual firm. So we share that information. So if you're interested, you can go to agileinnnonprofits.com and subscribe to our newsletter. It's not going to sell you anything. It's really just going to sign you up for a newsletter. You've got my promise. I've been keeping an eye on the questions box, and so I see that we've got one coming up here from Catherine. But if you haven't entered a question and you've got one that's burning about Scrum and grants, this is the perfect time to start typing. I also would like to ask a few questions of you as we get ready to wrap up today's session. I'm curious to know if, as a result of today's session, if you're interested in learning more about Scrum. Don't worry, my feelings won't be hurt if you say no. I really just honestly want to know. We've got, a lot of you are saying that you are. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's answer some questions. We've got, what tool would I recommend to create graphs that automatically track grant progress? Ooh, there's a number, but the one that my team and I use and I'm most comfortable in right now is called Jira, J-I-R-A. But honestly, the automatic piece, you're still moving the stories. Using it in your office, whiteboard and Post-its, that's even more fun. The tools are great, but putting it in your office is my actual absolute favorite. One other question. If you said you were interested in Scrum, why is it that you think it might be able to make the difference in your organization? While you're answering that, let's tackle another question. Helen said that I indicated this could work in a one-person shop. How does that work? It really comes down to the grant team interaction. So having your cross-functional grant team, finance, HR. My assumption when you say one-person shop isn't that you are the founder and runner of the organization, doing all the things, wearing all the hats, right? But that rather you're in an organization, you're the only grant person. I get it, it's lonely, but you've got those other organizational roles, your peers that are your team that help you with the work. Sierra asked if you could use Scrum even for small local foundation applications. Absolutely. We use it for every application. You just have fewer stories when you break out a foundation application. But we have specific definitions of done for why a Post-it can move. So like, what is version 1 of a foundation grant? What is version 2 of a foundation grant? Then there's version 3 and final. We break out those definitions of done with things like, when is grammar edit done? When does client input get asked for the first time? When is client approval given? Clay asked if there's a Scrum nonprofit user or Facebook group. Not yet, Clay, but stay tuned. There's some great new stuff coming out. Let's see. Oh, lots of awesome questions coming in. Okay, we'll keep going. Scrolling to the bottom, let's see, we've got a junior staffer. Kyra says, how do you convince the team that doesn't always agree with these kinds of plans, they love waterfall, to actually use Scrum? So the good part is that, if you have people that love waterfall, timelines, dependent related sequential timelines are a necessary part of our work because of the nature of our deadlines. So you can still show timelines to those that love waterfall project management, but showing the burn down, showing your progress, being able to estimate so accurately when you would finish an application, to imagine that out of a 90-day application, you could say, you know what, we know our velocity and we're going to be done on day 72, and then do it, you will rock their world. That's the only way to describe it. Let's see. Shelley asked if I use software such as Trello or a virtual substitute for Post-it notes. So Post-it, the actual Post-it company, right, 3M, Post-it has its own free app, and it's incredibly slick and a good way that actually, if you don't want to pay for any software or do anything fancier, you can take a picture of your Post-its on a wall and it will translate it into an electronic Post-it. That's probably one of my favorites. Susan asked how you can use Scrum to help in identifying priorities for funding. Oh, Susan, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about when we ran out of room in the deck for 1 hour. This is what we use when we go on site with clients and their senior leadership team talking about funding priorities for the year. We've done it in hospital settings, community group settings. We've done it in institutions of higher ed. It's amazing. But the estimations aren't about applications. It's about priorities and the business value to the nonprofit for those priorities. We just talked about that part actually the other day with a Grant Professionals Association group. If you want to know more, Susan, drop me an email and I can share more with you about that. Aubrey asked how does Scrum interface with a project management platform, or is it in place of? So there are folks that are Agile folks, and then there are those that are strict project management folks. So you could say Scrum is in place of project management, but they get pretty heated in conversation between those that are certified in project management and then those that are Agile focused in their work. Happy to share more about that debate and the discussion offline if you are looking for some resources, Aubrey. Let's see. Anna asked if, as a small nonprofit and the one person putting together grant applications, if the book would help learn more about Scrum for a team of one. It would give you more understanding of what it really means to be Scrum. Honestly, Anna, there are some great blog posts out there that might help you understand. So if you want to ask, I can share some links with you after. It also depends on the way that you like to learn about new ideas or tools for whether or not the book or the Kindle version or whatever might be preferred to you versus some other forms. So let me know and I can share some extra resources. Lisa asked if I know of many universities using Scrum for their cross-faculty grants. So I am not at liberty to say. I know that there are a few universities in particular that have been trained in Scrum and have certified Scrum folks in their organizations. It's not my personal examples, and so I can't share their names, but the answer is yes. And I can talk with you about how I've seen it done and give you some ideas. Let's see. Kelly asked if, other than the daily dialogue and the nifty chart, how can Scrum be used to help underperformers? Oh, yeah. So the chart really helps. The daily dialogue helps. Because it's making work visible, it is hard to hide if you are an underperformer on a cross-functional team. That's the reality. There's no rock to hide under. It is all visible to the team. So that quickly helps shake things out. Let's see. Jane asked, for things outside of the grant process that derail the calendar, how do you prioritize or handle? Sure. So when one of those things happens, something is put in front of you as the grant professional and you're like, but I have all these other things, and whoever's telling you about it is like, yeah, but this is critical. You've got to do it. You look to your team. You look to those that are working with you and you say, all right, what is more important? What can we shift? And if you're not the product owner, the one setting the priorities, or you've got, I'm guessing, organizational leadership, you say, look, here's our capacity. Here's what we already have as priorities. Something's got to give, right? And so you facilitate the conversation as part of your sprint planning. Oh, these are such good questions. I'm like, Tammy, is it okay if I keep going? We've gone over.
Yes. Hey, let's keep going. I want to tell people that if you have to go, please give us feedback, but we're going to stay on. I love these questions too. They're great. We have additional webinars coming up we won't have one in March, but in April, we're going to have more of a 101 grants from A to Z. So if you know people that want an early start on a grant topic, have them look for that. And we have a really good one in May coming up on program development with Jonna Rogers. Excited for that. So let's keep going. I'm turning the time back to Diane, and I'm hearing a lot of this. They want you back and more and deep, and definitely. But Diane is one of our best partners, and we have meetings already on the calendar to talk about how we can continue working on this.
Yes, we do. And I've put my social media handles up too if you want to stay in touch there. Or as I said, here's my email address, diane@dhleonardconsulting.com. Let's see. So Leslie asked, she's kind of summarized, right? So she said, if I'm understanding, Scrum involves assigning points to each step of the application and developing a points timeline for it. So, sounds like it might take more time than it's worth. How would you convince us it's not? Oh, yes, fair, because at this high level that I've explained it, it does. It sounds like, well, how much time does this really take? So sprint planning for my team takes out of a 2-week sprint, it takes 30 minutes. If we're really getting nitty gritty and we've got lots of big things coming up, like we've got multiple federal applications or we're taking something big on as a project, it could take up to an hour, but usually it's a 30-minute session, and that's covering everything happening in the next 2 weeks. We are then all in agreement as a team with what our items are that we're going to tackle, what their priorities are, and we're able to communicate that to each other, to report on it to each other. And you'll have to trust me on the data. In terms of our team's velocity, since we implemented Scrum over 3 years ago, it is astronomical how it has increased without sacrificing award percentages for clients, dollars received, etc. And to me, a great thing to see is the team happiness, because that means that they are engaged in their work, they're happy, and happy team members produce great, happy work. So hopefully that helps to convince you just a little bit. It does take some work to manage it, but it would take work regardless of what system you might try instead. I got some questions about elaborating on assessing if you're ahead or behind. So specifically slide 44 was the burn down chart. So the burn down is saying our total sprint goal was X number of points. In that case, it was 1,500. And then based on the stories in our planned sprint, how are we doing? As we move a story to done, it moves the line down. So the gray line on that slide was a trend line. What should it look like to finish on time? So when the red line is above the gray trend line, it means we're behind. When we're finishing stories and therefore completing points, and that actual line of work is below the trend line, it means we're ahead. It's a really quick visual. It's one that Jira automatically creates for you as one of their standard charts, but it's one that, as I said, we have it on a whiteboard in our office, and we just spend a minute or two every day updating that as we close out. As Tammy mentioned, right, the slides are in the handout. You'll get the recording after. Would love to talk with anyone about Scrum that's interested, so please do reach out. Happy to talk with you more, and definitely we'll be in touch, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a ton of support material coming out from Agile and nonprofits because of it. So thank you, Tammy, Grant Hub, and Foundant for having me today. This was, well, in my world, a ton of fun.
It was too, and I'm looking at implementing this here with my roles at Foundant and figuring out how we're going to prioritize different features into the Grant Hub product. I'm having a great time too. So very relevant, and I really loved how you applied it to grants and the grant development process. Thank you again, Diane, so much. And for giving your email as a way to contact if anybody has follow-up. And stay tuned. We continue to work with Diane, as she said, and find ways that we could get her knowledge shared with this community. Thank you. And again, as you exit, please give us feedback and rate the session so that we know what other topics and how well you like this topic. Thank you, everyone, and we wish you the best success in your fundraising efforts. Take care.